I'm Pip Stellick, joined by my business partners. We're here to help beginning investors with their first transaction and seasoned investors make more money. Our company trains and mentors thousands of students from all over the world to become successful real estate investors. For more information, visit our website, pipspath.com, where we have tons of resources for you to get started now, including our personal scorecard and tons of videos for you guys to watch. Today's episode, we are going to be talking about how we got started. And it's the same step we all took before we ever got into property. What we did is we read one book. This one book can change your life. Foreign ideas and concepts. Who do you listen to? That's what this book is about. So the first step is to read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. I was actually trained by Robert Kiyosaki back in 2007 to go out and teach other people on how to invest in property. So what I'd like to do is bring in Bradley and Steve. Bradley, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, sir. How about yourself?
Steve, you doing well?
Real good over here. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. And I know we don't have Sam today. Sam had some flight issues. Obviously, that's a bit of a challenge, but hey, what are you going to do? So he couldn't get to the studio today. He'll be here with us on future podcasts. And so what I'd like to do is really get Bradley started off talking about what's the difference between, and obviously the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I'll add to it as well. The book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, how did it help you kind of figure out between rich versus wealthy? What was that all about? I know you've got some background on that, Bradley.
Yeah, one of Kiyosaki's principles in that book is talking about the difference between being rich and being wealthy. And this was something I had learned after I had graduated college. I was working as a pharmacist, so most people would say I had a great job. I was making a big salary. And in my head, because that was more money than my parents had ever made, I'm thinking, "Oh man, I've figured this out. Now I'm rich. I've got money. I've got options."
Well, I think it's what big salary, big job, big head. They kind of go all hand in hand.
That's
don't
exactly
Did you have a
right.
big head at this point too?
Well, I mean, it wasn't necessarily a big head. It was just that I thought everything was going to be okay. I thought that I had found the right way to survive and live a good life. But
You figured it out. That's what you thought. You'd figured it out. You found the magic pill.
That's well, and it was the magic pill that I had been fed, I guess, right? You're going to go to college so you can get a better education than we got. That's what my parents are telling me growing up. So I'm thinking, okay, this is it. My dad made X amount. I'm making double that. I'm 23 years old. Like smooth sailing from here.
I think we've all been there. 20-something, we got it all figured out. We're good. Then what happens?
Well, it's the reality of, hey, I'm making big money, but to make big money as a pharmacist, you worked every other weekend. You worked half your shifts were night shifts. It was working retail, and at the end of the day, I was a very high-paid cashier.
So here's the quiz. What is the worst time to work retail? What's the worst time of year to work retail? And the answer always is things like
The holidays?
the worst time to work retail is anytime because retail sucks. It
Always.
does. Yeah.
It's brutal.
Oh, I said the S word. I shouldn't have probably said that, but I already did. So it's out there.
We can
Shucks.
bleep you out, you potty mouth. But
We got to cut something every time. A lot of stuff from Pip will be cutting.
that's exactly right. It might be on HBO by the time we get done with you. But the rich versus wealthy, it really came down to making good money at my job. There were still expenses. I still had a monthly mortgage payment and student loan debt. I was still kind of that paycheck to paycheck, and it just didn't seem like that's what I wanted to do until I was 65 years old. It was still just a grind, really. I wanted to spend time doing what I wanted. I want to be able to spend time with my parents in Pennsylvania, even though I live in Florida. I want to be able to go spend time with my sister and her growing family. But if I was going to work a job, I'd maybe have 3 to 4 weeks a year of vacation that I could go do those things. And to me, that just didn't sound like too great of a life. And reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad and understanding the concept of real estate investing, meaning I could make passive income, which we talk all about the fact it's really not fully passive. There is still work involved, but if I can run my business from anywhere with an internet connection, that's a pretty cool way to live. So wealthy becomes the measure of how much money will your time, or how much time will your money last for. So I really think that understanding that making the same amount of money in a different way, instead of having to go and punch that clock for 40 or 50 hours a week, to be able to have it in real estate where just comes in over time, whether you're there or not, was the opening eye moment for me in reading Rich Dad Poor Dad.
And I think from you told me before is that you didn't even want to read the book.
No.
How did that come about?
So, of course, my wife, I call her my better three quarters for a reason. She had read the book, and she says, Bradley, you've got to read this book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I was like, Renee, I have a doctorate in pharmacy. I have a master's in business. I'm literally never reading another book for as long as I live. And she says, no, seriously, it's different. I said, no, seriously, I'm not reading another book. But she, of course, smarter minds prevail. And next morning, I'm getting in the car to go to the pharmacy. And sure enough, it has been downloaded on my phone and just starts playing on the Bluetooth as I'm driving to work. So, chalk one up for Renee there, but I did. So I listened to the book, and it really was that kind of eye-opening thing of, hey, maybe real estate is the way where I could have some control over how my money grows and how I could bring in an income.
Well, what I think is interesting is the kind of that bridge there, because you said you were like force-fed this pill of, get a good education, get a good job, and then Renee kind of force-fed you a totally different type of knowledge and education, which is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And so it's interesting how you were kind of forced both of them, and you could thrive either way. But now that you're doing property, you're thriving in your way and working when you want to work. I said that the biggest difference is when you have that freedom of choice, of not having to be at the pharmacy. I about said the name of the pharmacy. Okay, Walgreens for from 8 o'clock at night until midnight or whenever you had to fill those pill bottles, right?
Well, exactly, and that's the difference between rich and wealthy is people, if you're measuring your dollars that you have, you're considering, are you rich? But wealth is you're measuring your time. And if I've got enough money in the bank where I don't have to go work for the next 6-12 months, that's really the position I want to be in. I could never do that as a pharmacist. It was always just trying to keep up with daily life. As soon as you get a promotion now, then it is time to get a nicer car or a nicer place to live or that sort of thing. And you really, that's why they call it the rat race. You just kind of get stuck there. And really, I look back, I was plateaued the day I walked into that pharmacy. I mean, yes, I had that big salary, but as a pharmacist, where do you go from there? There's nowhere higher really other than working up through a corporation, but that's all business, not even using my pharmacy degree.
So how many years ago was it? Because, we've got different age groups here. We've got the millennial here with Bradley, and we've got Steve, who is the same age bracket as I am, which is old.
Hey.
Well,
you're
I'm
older.
I know. I'll get to me being the oldest in a minute. But so how long ago did you read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, Bradley?
I read that book. It was 2016, so 7 years ago.
So, Steve, when did you do you remember? I know you're old and sometimes forgetful in your old age. When did you read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad?
2010.
2010. So that's been a number of years ago. Mm-hmm. As we sit here today, that's 13 years ago. Mm-hmm. 13 years ago, Bradley was still finishing up school.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy to think that.
Something I should add to that, I read the book the first time in 2010, and a lot of good information in there, a lot of life-changing strategies I learned, skills I learned. And I reread the book about 2 years ago again, too. So not many books I read a second time, but I read it again, was that 10, 11 years later.
So did you get something different out of it the second time you read it than the first time?
Not really. The first time was just all these revelations, the big learning points. The first time, the second time is more a refresher. And the cool thing is, the first time I read it, all these new ideas. He starts talking about leverage, all these different ideas, leverage of your mind. So the first time you're reading it, it's like, well, is that even possible? I like the idea, or joint venture, but whatever it is. And then reading it again, 11, 12 years later, I had been doing these things for a number of years, but a lot of these things started, one through obviously doing real estate at a higher level, having a mentor and formal education, but just doing the business, learning how to do the business. So the second time reading the book was very different from the first time, and look back on it as a good review, but that's where a lot of it started for me.
So like when you read this book back in 2010, is that what you said?
Yep.
Yeah, Bradley doesn't even remember that. He was partying at college, I guarantee it. And so when you read that book, working hard.
I'm just picturing him doing Jell-O shots in the dorm right now or something.
I don't even want to picture any of that stuff. But when you went back and you look at that book, what were some of the revelations that your aha moments from reading that book, if you had any?
I think just the biggest one was the leverage, where he talks about leverage in there, leveraging ideas, leveraging other people's time, getting mortgages, just the whole big picture stuff. Like he never teaches you how to fix a sink. He'll teach you get a property manager. He never teaches you how to do things. He'll never teach you how to paint a wall or become a realtor. That's not the idea. The idea is go do it, empower yourself, get a team of people, and just leverage your time, leverage your skills, other people's money, other people's energies. So all these things, it just goes from there. So like I said, once I read the book the second time, I've been doing these things for a number of years.
So you were working at a family business when you read that book. Mm-hmm. I know I was doing the same thing. When I read the book, I was working at a family business. How did you start looking at that business that you were working in differently when you read that book?
I learned I was the leverage, because you can either, I'm not an accountant, but I have accountants, and so for me to learn, I could do my own taxes. So I come tax season, I could hire, I could buy the software on TurboTax or whatever. I could learn to do the accounting myself, do my own taxes, or I could hire an accountant. Well, I hired an accountant because my time is more valuable, and I want that specialized knowledge from an accountant who spends all their time reading the tax codes, reading how to do accounting, reading how to do year-end filings. That I have no I have no interest in doing any of that stuff. You don't want me doing your taxes, that's for sure. I didn't want to do my own taxes, so you learn to do them yourself. Back when I was working in the family business, I was the leverage. Because in a family business, small business, it's the old saying, are you working on your business or working in your business? Well, I was clearly working in the business, not on the business, because 50, 60, 70 hours a week, I was in the business working, hustling, grinding, just doing the business, and in my spare time working on the business, which is the wrong way. But I didn't know, and of course, small business, strapped for cash flow, that's just the way it was, and I did that for 20 years, and that was a big, once I learned about property and Robert Kiyosaki, it changed the way I did things, changed the way I looked at things, because now I learned how to work on the business, not in the business.
That's such a different thing, because I know I was working in a small family business as well when I read that book. And the only way I could figure out how to make more money was to sleep less. And that's before I read that book, I kept thinking that. So that whole leverage piece of using other people's efforts, other people's energy, other people's time was a little bit beyond me, because I was just trying to figure out how to put more money in my pocket. And the only way I could figure that out is how to have less going out and me working harder. And so I think that was a real aha moment for me, is because I just was trying to work harder. And I'm the typical business owner mentality. And my dad was a business owner. And I'll guarantee, Steve, you can answer this question. Steve or Bradley, you can answer this question as well. When my dad would come home from work, he'd say, if I want anything done right, I've got to do it
myself.
And you don't even have to have a dad that was a business owner or a mom that was a business owner. We all were brought up that way. And your parents, Bradley, I know that was a thing for them, because to this day, they are not even business owners. They're an employee mindset. And I remember you telling me some stories about your dad, and the fact that, it was kind of an aha moment when you started making more money than your dad had ever made in a very short period of time. Your first month in the pharmacy, you made more than your dad had ever made in 40 years of working in a year at his business, or in his line of work. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was. I literally remember my first year as a pharmacist paying more in taxes than my dad had made, which really should have been my alarm going off. Like, you realize how much you're giving back being an employee of somebody else's business in taxes? Oh, it was crazy.
So how old were you when this happened? What age?
23.
And so I'm guessing one of your first purchases, I'm just guessing, and Steve, I bet you can appreciate that. I'll bet it was something on four wheels.
Oh, it was the nicest car I could get, of course.
Well, okay, so what was the first car that you bought?
So it was 2 days after pharmacy graduation.
So you hadn't even gotten paid yet?
No. Just to sign the contract. I hadn't even moved yet. I took my old beat up Jeep Wrangler, drove it into the Dodge dealership, and left with a brand new Challenger, and drove it down to Florida with no furniture, nothing else, and was ready to start being a pharmacist.
Wow. So how much stuff can you get in a Challenger? Is that a two-door car?
Yep.
That's what I kind of figured.
Not much.
Sounds fast.
All I needed was T-shirts and bathing suits for Florida, so it was okay.
Because
All the winter clothes stayed home.
so at Walgreens, they let you be a pharmacist in T-shirts and bathing suits.
Have you been to Florida?
I have been,
So,
but
well, then you understand.
See, Bradley, you didn't mention sunscreen. I think Bradley didn't need sunscreen because they figured he'd be surrounded by all the young ladies in Florida. They'd give him shelter from the sun. So you didn't mention sunscreen.
Well, the unfortunate part was the only reason I would have needed sunscreen was to keep the glare off my face at the drive-through at Walgreens every day. So, that's what I always tell people. You know what's great about having your dream car as a pharmacist? You can look at it out the drive-through window because I was always working. I was never out enjoying it or driving it. So.
So it's kind of tempting to just have it be in front of you. Well, and I think for me, that's, we look at this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and for all of us, it literally changed the way that we live our lives. And it doesn't matter if you're 20-something when you read the book, if you would have been in your 40s when you read that book.
40 years old.
40, man, you're old when you read that book.
Seems like only 13 years ago.
Yeah, it seems like only 13 years ago. I read that book over 20 years ago. And a buddy of mine handed me this book, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was January of 2002. My wife is pregnant with our first daughter, and my wife wants to be a stay-at-home mom. That's Jennifer's goal, is to be a stay-at-home mom. And she's making a whopping $28,000 a year, and I'm working in a family-owned business making $35,000, $36,000 a year. And she wants to eliminate literally 50% of our income. And I'm trying to figure out how to make more money. And she's reading books. I'm reading books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and she's reading books like What to Expect When You're Expecting. And so we're trying to figure out how this is going to happen. And what I did is I read this book. My buddy gave me this book. And what I noticed about my buddy, I'm from a little bitty town in Nebraska. And a high-paying person there, or if you're a teacher and your spouse is a teacher, you're at the top of the food chain in small-town Nebraska when it comes to making money. I'm not knocking it. That's just what it is. Not a lot of income happening in Nebraska City. And so what happened was I'm looking at my buddy who was a vice president at a small bank, and he's making six figures. He hands me this book and he says, "Hey, Pip, I'm going to quit my job and start my own business." And that was a revelation moment to me. Why was it a revelation? Because this guy who I thought was making a bunch of money is going to quit his job. Why? Because just like you, Bradley, he had no control over his income. And even though it sounded like a lot of money at the time to me, I think most of us realize that if your goal is to make six figures, once you make six figures, if you're blessed enough to do that, you realize that's not as much money as you thought because you're highly taxed and your lifestyle goes up and you buy a Dodge Challenger.
A really nice brand new Dodge
really
Challenger.
brand new, yeah.
With racing stripes.
Because
Low
last
mileage.
I checked.
Low mileage because you didn't go anywhere.
I'm not a car guy. Bradley, and I want to make sure everybody sees this. So put the cameras on all of us because I'm going to ask you, what's the nicest car you ever had, Steve? Nicest car you ever had. Do you remember? I know at your age it's tough to remember those kinds of things.
The nicest car I've
It's the
ever
nicest car you ever had.
I guess my favorite car, nicest, I had a classic Corvette.
Classic Corvette,
Yep.
beautiful. What year was it? Do you remember?
88.
88, classic Corvette. That's awesome. 88, you were 2 or 1 or something at that time, Bradley.
1.
What's your favorite car you ever had?
Oh, that Challenger was probably at my 2011 392 Hemi Challenger.
Okay. Can I ask a dumb question?
They always are.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I've never owned a Dodge Challenger. I've never owned a Corvette. And so let me ask you, because I'm a very basic car guy. How many wheels, how many tires does the Dodge Challenger have?
4 very expensive tires.
4 very expensive tires, okay? Because my car has 4 tires. That's good. So I'm equal there. That's good. Does your car have a steering wheel? That classic Corvette, does it have a steering wheel?
It did.
So does mine. Shocking how this works. And just to be sure, did your Dodge Challenger have brakes?
Yes, it did.
And did your Corvette have brakes?
Sure did.
Sure did. Well, what I'm trying to say is it really doesn't matter what kind of car you got. They've all got 4 tires. They've all got brakes. They've all got steering wheels. Now, obviously, they have to be in working order. But having a fancy car doesn't make you a fancy person. It literally just gives you a fancy payment. And that's what I kind of learned from the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is we have to learn to do what? Buy assets. Mm-hmm. What's an asset? That's something that puts money in our pocket. So as a new investor, for all of our cash flow Joes out there that want to learn how to start being an investor, what does the book Rich Dad Poor Dad really teach us? It teaches us the difference between assets and liabilities. Now, I know those sound like professional words that only accountants use, but in a very simple concept, an asset puts money in your pocket, whereas a liability takes money out of your pocket. Now, what really got people stirred up, and when you read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you're going to hear that he says your house is not an asset. Steve, you had a nice house when I met you 13, 14 years ago, right?
You've been to my house.
I've been to your house, yeah. It was a nice house. Was that putting money in your pocket every day?
That was making me go to work every single day.
It's making you go to work every single day.
Overhead.
And you didn't even have a house. You just had a rent payment, didn't you, buddy?
Well, the house payment was my student loans payment.
Oh, I got you. So there we go.
That's how that worked for me.
It got you a JOB, a job. What does JOB stand for? Just over broke. We should know that. But as we look at this stuff, I mean, I start to think of it. I've never been a guy that's had fancy stuff. I mean, if you're watching the podcast or if you're listening to the podcast, if you're watching the podcast, you always see that I wear T-shirts and hoodies. That's pretty much me dressing up.
Pip's not a real fancy guy. Now, Jen's got lots of nice stuff, but Pip not so much.
Yeah, well, that's why I got married, is so I could buy nice stuff for my wife. That's really what it comes down to. But
Smart man.
I am not a fancy guy whatsoever. So if you're listening to this podcast, I'm wearing a gray hoodie that says Pip's Path on it. And if I want to get fancy, I'll put on the blue hoodie that says Pip's Path on it. That's my fancy
You
hoodie.
save that for Sundays,
I save that for special occasions. So what I want you guys to think about, in the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, if it's not putting money in your pocket, it's really not considered an asset. And Kiyosaki got a lot of grief over that because he said your house is not an asset. And we're going to get into all these details when it comes to property. And as a new property investor, one of the things you need to understand is if the property, let me rephrase that, if the asset is not putting money in your pocket, it's not an asset. It's a liability. It's costing you money every month. I had the opportunity, I think we'll go with opportunity, to get mentored and trained by Robert Kiyosaki. Now, I'm not going to sit out here and say Robert Kiyosaki and I are best friends. In fact, I doubt he would know me if he saw me again. He may recognize my face. He may remember my name because it's unique, but he sees millions of people over his career. And that was way back. Man, you were still in college, 2007. What were you doing in 2007, Bradley?
I was a sophomore in college.
Wow. 2007, you were working at the family business, weren't you? Mm-hmm. Just trying to figure out how to get enough time to go on your next golf trip.
Well, just basically trying to pay down my mortgage, trying to get out of debt, live the good life, and trying to figure out when is this going to end? The never-ending.
When's it going to end?
Wheel, the rat race. So
That's
I was working.
That's why they call it the rat race. It's kind of like a rocking chair. A rocking chair will give you something to do, but it's not going to get you very far. Mm-hmm. And so when that's a good little quote.
We'll put that in the database.
You put that in the database. That's one of my dad jokes or a dad comment. It will give you something to do, but it's not going to get you very far.
Wah, wah, wah. I can't reach the buttons, but I'll just say it.
And so when I got mentored by Kiyosaki, his comment was, or his demeanor, I guess is probably a better way to look at it, was very to the point. There wasn't a lot of kidding around. There wasn't a lot of joking around. In fact, he told us like it is. And I learned this from Kiyosaki, and we are probably going to have a blast as we do these podcasts. There's no doubt about it. We can't get up in the morning without having some fun. In fact, I'm always going to be joking and having a good time. But when it's really all said and done, our job as helping you become better real estate investors is to tell you what you need to hear, not always what you want to hear. And so we're going to challenge you with some stuff. And some of those things we're going to challenge you with are things like, what about credit cards? What about good debt, bad debt, all those kinds of things? What about Dave Ramsey? Now, I'm going to wait till Sam is on one of our podcasts to talk about Dave Ramsey because I know he's got a very, very big opinion of Dave Ramsey. And I don't knock Dave Ramsey. I think he's got a large audience to talk to. I mean, heck, Steve just said back in 2007, he was trying to figure out how to get out of debt. Well, what Kiyosaki talks about is how to get into debt, but to use good debt. And the more debt you have, the more leverage you have. And Steve was talking about leverage a little bit ago. And that's really what we want to get into. And credit cards are a part of that debt that can be good debt. I know some of you guys, as soon as I say the word credit cards, their butt cheeks just start to squeeze together. Yeah.
Did you say butt cheeks?
Yeah, I say
on YouTube and a podcast.
I say butt cheeks a lot. Yeah, I know people are going to go, "Who is this guy?" Well, I mean, I have lots of opinions, and opinions are like belly buttons. We've all got them, and so I'm going to give you my opinions. Steve's going to be giving you his opinions. Bradley will be giving you his opinions. Even when Sam gets here, he'll give you a lot of opinions. We all have him. Yeah. And so we're starting these podcasts without Sam because, unfortunately, luck of the draw, his flight didn't make it. But we are really going to dive into these concepts, and we just want to make sure you get introduced to the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because it's really, I guess, a starting point. It's a key to understanding the mindset to become a successful business owner, entrepreneur, and most importantly, real estate investor. And so as we continue these kinds of things, you're going to see that this is just the foundations. And we get students or questions from students all the time. I've been teaching, and I know, Steve, you probably said this last time on the podcast. How many different countries have you taught in?
I've taught real estate investing in 8 different countries.
I believe Sam has taught it in 12 different countries. I've been in 18 different countries. And the millennial here, he hasn't gone foreign to do this, but he has been in. How many states do you think you've probably taught property investing, Bradley?
It's somewhere in the 30s.
Somewhere in the 30s. Well, when you're an analytical guy, you can't get the exact number, I guess. Somewhere in the 30s. He cannot confirm or deny either one of those things.
I'm just trying to be less analytical. Look, do you see the control I had there to
That's
not
tough.
tell you the exact number of
Yeah,
states?
because he knows the exact number. He's just not saying it.
I'm just playing it cool.
Somewhere in the 30s. And so we get questions from our students on a daily basis. In fact, right before we started the podcast today, Steve and I are both answering emails from our students. And so what we're going to do on future podcasts is we're going to bring in, I guess we're going to call it the mailbag. Is that what we want to call it?
We talked about the mailbag and we talked about different names, but hey, we're open to ideas. If you've got a different name for, we're going to share some student questions. We have our students come in. If you're an existing student, you have our contact information. People can go to our website. We're going to give you our contact information at the end here for our socials and that stuff. But if you got a better name for mailbag, because everything comes by email. Like, what is a mailbag anymore? There's probably some young listeners don't even know what a mailbag is, but it's like the old mailman with a bag or a satchel over his shoulder and delivering it to your home that actually had a mailbox attached to it. Well, who does that anymore? It's all community mailboxes. We now have to. Anyway, we're open to new ideas for mailbag.
I heard you say a couple of things there, and my butt cheeks squeezed together because we have to be so aware of how we say things in today's world. And you said mailbag.
Should be letter carrier.
Well,
I apologize.
But no, you said a mailman, and which is even worse because first of all, I think the term mailbag is a problem because we're only using males, meaning men. And so it's just men's questions. Is that what the mailbag is? Could it be the female bag? I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't even say the words female bag together. That's probably not a good thing. But when you said mailman, you really made it sexist. And I don't want to do that. I want to get in, we want to include everybody. We want to make sure everybody can get something out of the podcast. So we're going to just call it mailbag for right now. If you have a better name, as Steve said, then let us know what you think it should be called. They're student questions is what they are. We're answering questions on a regular basis. And so, Bradley, anything else you want to say about the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad before we cut out of here on this podcast?
I think it's important to understand that this book isn't just about real estate, it's about the financial intelligence. And whether you want to be a real estate investor or even what strategy you want to do in real estate, even if it's just understanding money at a higher level, this book is something you've got to read because understanding the mindset of a wealthy person is the only way you're going to ever get wealthy.
So it's basically the 7 inches between your ears, the mindset.
100%.
Steve, any closing thoughts on the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
Just read it. It is such a great read. And Bradley, let me ask you a question. I think I know. Have you ever bought a copy of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Bradley?
I've bought a couple copies of that book.
I've bought copies of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. In fact, I've bought copies and given them away. Bradley, have you ever given away any copies of Rich Dad, Poor Dad? A few. Pip, okay, everybody get ready. Pip, have you ever bought Rich Dad, Poor Dad? Have you ever given away any copies of Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
I would try. That's an interesting question. I'm going to do the math on that. In fact, I have my calculator here right now. Let's do this.
We don't want to hurt your brain.
Yeah,
Pip's
there's
doing
no way I. Yeah,
Pip's doing math. We did an event in Denver not long ago, and everybody who attended our event in Denver, and we gave away a few hundred copies at that one event in Denver, and that was just a couple months ago, actually. So Pip's doing some math. How many copies he's bought and given away over the past 55 years?
55 years. Let's be serious. I'm going to say just personally, not even when we gave away all those in one fell swoop, but personally, I bet I've given away 3,000 copies of that book, purchased and given away that many books, because every time I stand in front of a group of people and speak about anything, I utilize the Robert Kiyosaki concepts, and we'll talk more about what's called the cash flow quadrant and a lot of other things. But I've given away, I'm sure, over 3,000 copies of that book. It's that good. That's what I think of it. I remember reading the book when my buddy gave me the book. I read it, and what did I do immediately? I went out and brought every one of my brothers and my sister a copy of the book. I said, you got to read this. I gave my copy to my wife, and every one of my brothers and my sister, I gave them the book, and I said, this book will change your life. I just told my daughter, she's got to read this book. And so there's a lot of different things that we do with it. I think the biggest thing for me when it came to the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is and I'm obviously the oldest one on here. I don't know if I was obviously, maybe if you're watching this, Steve looks older than I do. Bradley sounds older than me because I sound like I'm 12 most of the time. At least that's what my wife says. But if you see me ever, you know that I'm the oldest guy on this group. And the one thing as we get older, what do we start to think about is retirement. And what I think is kind of the aha moment is go back to Bradley, and if he kept working at that pharmacy, go back to Steve, if he kept working at that family business without actual buying of assets, they would do what? They would put their money away, they'd put it into a 401k, they'd have some mutual funds, maybe a few stocks, maybe some Bitcoin, whatever their investments were. Very passive type investments. They'd put that money into those investments, and then whenever they wanted to retire, they'd say, okay, I hope I have enough money in that retirement account. And that was kind of, am I going to outlive my money? Do I have to go back and count pills 1 or 2 days a week just to make sure? Do I have to get a part-time job to make sure that I got enough so that I don't outlive my money? Well, what did the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad really speak to me was in retirement, if I have cash flowing assets, stuff that is making money no matter whether the market goes up, down, or sideways, if I have cash flowing assets, I can retire, as Bradley said, a lot sooner because that property is going to be paying me month after month after month. So in retirement, if I have enough cash flow coming in, I don't even have to worry about my retirement coming from a pension or my retirement coming from my 401k. I can just live off the cash flow of my properties. And that's really the goal that Robert Kiyosaki talks about. He doesn't even really talk about becoming rich. He talks about financial freedom, and Bradley kind of touched on this, is how do I have enough money coming in to just cover all my monthly expenses? If I have that.
A big statement he has, if I can just add to that, is so many people, like the American dream is, you work, save your money, retire. You have this mountain of money or maybe a company pension. But what happens in retirement? You get a discount on your income. You get a haircut. Is it 20%, 30%, 35%? So we're conditioned, the school system, corporations, they've conditioned us to live in less in retirement. Well, I know I left my day job. I left my day job in 2014, and my expenses, do you think my expenses went up or down? When you have more free time, do you think your expenses go up or down? What do you guys think?
I think they go up. You either buy another Dodge Challenger or you play some more golf or something.
You're golfing more. You're doing more. Free time's expensive. Free time, you want to enjoy your free time, so it's going to cost you more money. So wouldn't it be better if you had this free time when you retired, if you had a raise every year? Forget the 20, 30, 35% discount on your income. What if you had a property that you could raise the rents every year? What if you had an asset that went up in value every single year? So every year in retirement, you're making more money. That's the whole idea. We want to have assets, put money in your pocket, assets that pay you more every single year after year after year.
I know if you're a beginning investor, you're listening to some of this, you don't even understand the word asset and liability. That's why we're going to take you step by step through the process of how to become an investor through the Cash Flow Joe podcast. We want you to tune into our next episode where we will discuss the big question, what if I don't have a lot of money? When you go out and you're doing property, you think, oh my gosh, I need all this money. We're going to show you a lot of different ways about how to use something called OPM, other people's money. Don't call it opium, OPM, other people's money. Well, we can use opium, but that's other people's inactive, underused money. Yeah, we have acronyms for everything. We're going to show you how to do that. Until then, what I want you to do, as my buddy Bradley says, buy, borrow, download, listen to, whatever you do, consume Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's the one book that we all read that opened our eyes to the idea of real estate and changed all of our lives as well. But before we get out of here, I just want to say again, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you choose. I don't even know what those all are. For more investing information, you can go to our website, pipspath.com. Follow us on social media at PipsPath, the Property and Cashflow Joe podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Leave us a comment, give us a follow, and we'll continue to see you on the path. Adios.